Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. I'm Aaron Dykes. This is the INFOWARS Nightly News. Today is Tuesday, May 15th, 2012.
Tonight on the INFOWARS Nightly News, Bilderberg 2012. Meet the new face of treason as we report on the Bilderbergers' plan to hack the U.S. elections. Plus, Henry Kissinger gets a taste of his own tyranny as he is searched by unwitting TSA agents. Then, sound cannons to be used in Chicago to pacify the masses. All this and more coming up next on the INFOWARS Nightly News.
And of course, we also have an exclusive interview with Yuri Mason coming up tonight on how the World Bank is using loans as leverage to force population control measures on people. Now, turning to the Bilderberg Conference coming up in just a few weeks in Chantilly, Virginia, at their 2012 conference this year, Bilderberg's scheme to save the euro. Paul Joseph Watson writes that the globalists fear Greece could exit the single currency and stage a miraculous economic recovery. The Bilderberg Group is terrified that Greece's potential exit from the eurozone could lead to a dramatic economic recovery and provide a template for other countries to follow suit, threatening to torpedo the euro single currency and entire agenda for the European superstate. And of course, Iceland was an early template for the recovery because they said no to the bankers' debt, and they've basically already gotten themselves out of at least the worst of the financial crisis. Other countries like Ireland are talking about following suit, and they really don't want to be embarrassed here. You had the head of the Bilderberg Group, the steering committee chairman, Etienne Davignon, in 2009, bragging about how the meeting brought together the Euro project in the first place, really going back to the 50s, but especially in the early 90s. And now it is disastrously unraveling, and they don't want a country like Greece, A, to buck the austerity measures that would help them control the population, B, to embarrass their Bilderberg technocrats who've been taken over and put in without a vote, and C, they don't want them to lead the way for other European countries to reestablish their sovereignty, to avoid the banker debt, and to go independent rogue and create their whole domino scheme and allow it to collapse in a bad way. We'll keep an eye on what happens there. We're going to bring you more Bilderberg information, too, at the end of this broadcast. So we've got a special presentation that will come together. But first, Chicago cops buy sound cannon to provide protesters with public safety messages, and police there have spent over $1 million on riot equipment, including purchasing a controversial LRAD long-range acoustic device sound cannon designed to cause extreme pain to those in its path. Now, we've seen this at the Pittsburgh G20 meeting. We saw it at the Toronto G20 meeting. And we've seen it at other recent globalist meetings while all these cretins get together to jam another lousy globalist deal on us that's only going to put us in worse positions in the global economy and put more restraints on the population. They also want it to be a police state show measure, play with all their new toys, and of course legitimize using these less lethal devices on other countries they're at war with. Yes, they believe if they can use it on the U.S. population first, they could use it anywhere, and they want to make sure that in this age of great democracy, nobody in the streets with a voice can actually be heard, and they don't want to encourage any types of Occupy movements. Not in Chicago, not during that big lockdown. That's coming up next week. We're going to see what happens. Meanwhile, evidence TSA is a mindless machine. Henry Kissinger gets a pat down. We haven't seen the pictures yet, but it has been reported he was sent through TSA security without much of his own security, keeping him from being pat down, and that he got the full Monty. You know, the word on the streets, he kind of likes it, too. Anyway, perhaps in an ideal world, it would be good for our leaders to be held to the same standards as the populace, but with such a runaway police state, invasive, Constitution-destroying and violating measure, well, I'm not even in favor of old Kissinger getting the pat down at the airport. If they want to do it after he's being arrested and put on treason for trial, that's a different story. The U.S. and Canada are implementing beyond-the-border perimeter security initiatives. This has been going on for months, but it's gotten very little play. Dana Gabrielle, who wrote this report, has been following the issue for months, for years, for a long time. And this is a beyond-the-border pact to more closely merge Canada with the United States. They're now allowing border enforcement, law enforcement people to share data across borders. They, for instance, have given Homeland Security all of Canadians' passenger data, even if they don't travel through the United States. Furthermore, they're ratcheting up the trusted traveler programs, the use of biometrics at border crossing checkpoints and other track points, and they're just overall merging the two systems, allowing a fusion not just of police and military, but of different nations as they merge us into the larger North American Union. And regulatory czar Cass Sunstein, among others, had a big part in that. The U.S. and Canada are also scheduled to deploy a land-based version of the Shipwriter program at some point this summer as part of the security perimeter deal. Both countries will implement 2 next-generation pilot projects to create integrated teams in areas such as intelligence and criminal investigations, and an intelligence-led uniform presence between points of entry. Attorney General Eric Holder, an upstanding man, revealed plans that would allow law enforcement officers to operate on both sides of the border, announcing the creation of Next Gen with cross-designated officers allowing blah, blah, blah. Yeah, they just want to clamp down on all that info. We'll keep an eye on that as it continues to develop. They're also using that plan to harmonize GMO regulations and force it on Canada. We're going to discuss this in greater detail with Yuri Masson later in the program. However, the UN and World Bank strangle sovereign nations into accepting global population reduction dictates. And what is this? It's World Bank loans with that backing from the policy set by the United Nations Fund for Population Activities and other branches that control population, deal with environment. And they're saying now to nations, especially in the developing world, that if you want those loans, you're going to first meet those population reduction goals. And this is looking forward. They've done this stuff in decades past. It's been a scandal. But now in their current report for the year 2010, which looks forward to the year 2015, it explains what they're trying to accomplish and how. It's very similar to the schemes they used through the IMF to control third world and developing nations, seize control of those resources, turn it over to mainly Western-backed corporations, and exploit and keep down the population, all under the promise of free trade, giving those countries jobs and otherwise uplifting them. It doesn't. We know the strings are very harmful. The devil's in the details. We know that. You heard about Kony 2012. That itself was months after Obama began his rather covert invasion of Africa to legitimize the AFRICOM mission to seize oil and other assets in Central Africa in particular, and to ratchet up public support for humanitarian crises here, certain causes here. We know that Kony's a leader who hasn't been seen in more than 5 years. He's got kind of a rogue army. Yes, they're a problem, nothing compared to the outright genocidal dictators in Africa and all over the world. With that said, Uganda displays a captive Kony lieutenant, so they now have a little prize, a little trophy in their hunt for the Lord's Resistance Army. Radhika Kumaswamy, a UN Special Representative for Children in Armed Conflict, called on Ugandan authorities Monday not to apply amnesty, but instead to bring back Akelem to justice. The arrest and subsequent prosecution of Akelem would send a strong message to the LRA leadership that they will be held accountable for their actions. Of course, they want to hold them accountable in the International Criminal Court set up by George Soros, which really hasn't done anything yet. They're trying to legitimize that use, make it a big splash, which, by the way, does not apply to the United States or most of the other Western countries. It's only to go after showpieces in Africa, little dictators they can brand as bad guys, but who nobody really knows who they are or what their impact has been. And all the Ugandans, by the way, said the whole Kony thing was a bad joke. Meanwhile, in close by South Sudan, of course, a country that split just recently in the past couple of years, now there's a North Sudan and a South Sudan, former U.S. official calls for arming the army. And we've rearranged the story here because our researchers, John Bounds and others, have really realized that they put as a footnote what seems to be on the surface the main reason for taking over interest in these countries. South Sudan briefly seized the Heglil oil field inside South Kordofan, which is vital to Sudan's economy because it produces almost half of the country's output of 115,000 barrels per day. That led to last January when President Barack Obama added South Sudan to the list of countries eligible to buy weapons from the U.S., leading to the former U.S. official said that the proposition he's making would create a stalemate and get the North back to the negotiating table. If the U.S. provides material, the South can end the North's bombing campaign. Most North Air Force pilots are mercenaries. If they start talking heavy losses, they will leave Sudan quickly. And of course, the Sudan story is important, not just because it's part of the same general region of Africa where AFRICOM is trying to take over, but because it's part of the same PSYOP. While Angelina Jolie and others were blah-blah-blahing about Coney 2012, you had actors like George Clooney and the State Department's John Prendergast going to South Sudan, showing dead people there, interviewing victims and sympathetic figures, all to call for this U.S. and Western-backed military presence in Sudan, which we see has a lot to do with the oil fields there. So just something to keep in mind when you're trying to do something humanitarian that actually leads to more war, like giving Obama the Nobel Peace Prize before he exacerbates conflict. We turn now to the quote of the day. It is from James Warburg, one of the founders of the Federal Reserve, a very important family. Back in 1950, he said, "We will have a world government, whether you like it or not. The only question is whether that government will be achieved by conquest or consent." And that was before the U.S. Senate, a very brazen statement indeed, but he's backed by some powerful criminals. We'll be back after this with even more on Bilderberg and the important, deadly Facebook connection. They are trying to hack our country, our elections, and more. Stay tuned. We'll have tech news on the other side. INFOWARS Nightly News.
Have you been to InfoWarsShop.com lately? Express your inner patriot with these brand new InfoWars t-shirts. Say it loud with the InfoWars Bullhorn shirt, or educate the sheeple with the Bill of Rights shirt. Grope the public's mind with the TSA shirt. And with this shirt, you can let the dark side know of the Rebel Alliance's power. All available at InfoWarsShop.com.
Sick of the globalist eugenicist control freaks adding poison to your water and laughing as you get sick and die? Start purifying your water with ProPure. My friends, I've done a lot of research, and the best